Over the centuries, coffee has become increasingly popular. It is the most traded tropical agricultural commodity in the world, but how has it changed the world? In today's video, we're going to discuss how coffee changed the world. Hundreds of years before Starbucks became a benchmark for establishing social and business connections through dairy products and laptops, thriving cafes of a very different kind were popular in the Arab world. The first cafes were in the holy city of Mecca in present-day Saudi Arabia. Nothing like them had ever existed. They were public places, known as kava canes, where people gathered for the same reason they go to Starbucks today, to have coffee, chat, discover and share the day's news, and do business. They also enjoyed music, but not through headphones connected to mobile devices. Early cafes were lively places that pulsed with artists singing and dancing to the beat of Middle Eastern music. Then as today, thousands of pilgrims from all over the world visited Mecca every year. When they returned home in those distant times, they brought with them stories of the wine of Arabia, as coffee was once called. But the Arab leaders did not want to lose their monopoly on the coffee trade. To prevent coffee from being grown elsewhere and to ensure the pilgrims' take-home stories with them, the imams have banned the export of coffee beans. Dutch merchants bypassed those export restrictions in 1616, and the world has never been the same since. Global drink. It is the most traded tropical agricultural commodity in the world, according to the International Coffee Organization. About 70 countries produce coffee. In 2010, world employment in the coffee sector was about 26 million people in 52 producing countries, and exports of 93.4 million bags in 2009-10 were estimated to be worth $15.4 billion according to the London-based group. World production for 2014-15 is forecast at 149.8 million bags, based on a USDA analysis from December 2014. The global demand and cultural popularity of coffee is more than just a morning ritual, has made it an easy choice to include in our list of foods that changed the world. Consider it a caffeine rush perhaps, but coffee has taken over fewer centuries than other foods we've explored so far, such as grapes, olives, and tea, to change regional and global cultures and economies. This is our interpretation of the history of coffee based largely on the information of the ICO and National Coffee Association of the USA, Inc. in New York City. Origins of coffee. Legends and various reports about coffee date back to the 10th century. While those stories cannot be verified, what is known for certain is that the undomesticated origin of coffee comes from the high mountain rainforests of Kaffa province in southwestern Ethiopia. These mountains are home to a species of tree, Coffea arabica, which produces a fruit called a coffee cherry. The fruit catches the name because it turns bright red when ripe and ready to pick. The skin tastes sour, but the underlying cherry fruit is sweet. In fact, Francine Sagan, a fruit historian and author, recently wrote in Zester Daily that it was because of the fruity aspect of the coffee cherry that coffee began as a food, not a drink. 1,000 years ago in Africa, locals crushed the ripe cherries of wild coffee trees to create a dried travel food packed with protein and nutrients. It was, Sagan reflected, sort of an early version of a breakfast bar. The fruit had protein, but as the world would discover, the real value of the coffee cherry lies deeper in the heart of the fruit. It was the seed, the two coffee beans side by side, that, when roasted, produced the most enticing and long-lasting flavor of the coffee cherry. Arabica coffees now account for 70% of the current world coffee production. All the plants of this species of coffee tree that are cultivated today are descended from plants from this part of Ethiopia. From the mountains of Kaffa, the coffee cherries were carried across the Red Sea to Mocha, the great Arab port of the time. There are records that slaves from present-day Sudan, which borders Kaffa to the west, ate the coffee cherries, and that slaves were taken to Yemen and Arabia. But precisely how or why the fruit of the plant was brought to the Horn of Africa, to the Arabian Peninsula, and how the secret of beans has been discovered was lost to time. What is known from historical records is that proven knowledge of the wonders of coffee trade or coffee consumption occurred in the mid-15th century in Sufi monasteries in Yemen. The Arabs were not the first to grow coffee, and the first to turn coffee beans into a drinkable liquid, but they did start the coffee trade. By the 16th century, coffee was known in Persia, Egypt, Syria, and Turkey. In an attempt to prevent its cultivation elsewhere, the Arabs prohibited the export of fertile coffee beans, a restriction that was finally circumvented by the Dutch in 1616, who brought live coffee plants to the Netherlands to be grown in greenhouses. Never before has there been anything like those first cafes born in Mecca. These were public places available to the masses for the price of a cup of coffee. At first, the Yemeni authorities encouraged the consumption of coffee. Before long, however, the conversation turned to politics, and cafes became a hub of political activity. At that time, between 1512 and 1524, imams began to ban both coffee shops and the consumption of coffee. At that time, coffee shops and coffee consumption were rooted in culture, and coffee shops kept coming back. Finally, the authorities and public have found a way to keep coffee as a drink and coffee shops as a meeting place by imposing a tax on both. Coffees have spread to other cities and countries of the Arab world. The first coffee shop in Damascus was opened in 1530. Soon after, there were many coffee shops in Cairo. In 1555, the first coffee shop was opened in Istanbul. Coffee spreads beyond the Ottoman Empire. In the late 1600s, the Dutch began growing coffee outside the Arab world, first in a failed attempt in Malabar in India, and then in 1699 in Batavia on Java in present-day Indonesia. It wasn't long before the Dutch colonies became the main suppliers of coffee in Europe, where people had heard stories from travelers to the Near East about an unusual black drink. The first cafes outside the Ottoman Empire appeared in Europe in Venice in 1629. The first cafe was opened in England in Oxford in 1652, and by 1655 there were more than 3,000 cafes in the country. Lloyd's of London was Edward Lloyd's coffee house before it was a global insurance company. The first cafe opened in Paris in 1672, and then perhaps the most famous cafe in the city, Café Procope, opened in 1686. It was a popular meeting place during the French Enlightenment, possibly the birthplace of the encyclopedia, and remains open today. Interestingly, coffee was not popular with everyone in Europe. Some called it Satan's bitter intervention, and the clergy of Venice condemned it. Pope Clement VIII was asked to intervene, and, finding it to his liking, he gave the coffee papal approval. The customs of the time did not always approve of women in cafes. Women were banned from many of these early European cafes, particularly in England and France. Germany, on the other hand, allowed women into these cafes to hang out. Coffee reaches the Americas. The Dutch were also the ones who brought coffee across the Atlantic to Central and South America, first to the Dutch colony of Suriname in 1718, then to French Guiana, and then to Brazil. In 1730, the British introduced coffee to Jamaica, which still produces the world's most expensive coffee in the island's Blue Mountains. 100 years later, Brazil has become the largest coffee producer in the world, generating around 600,000 bags per year. Cuba, Java, and Haiti have also become important producers, with world production reaching 2.5 million bags per year. Production continued to spread throughout the Americas, reaching Guatemala, Mexico, El Salvador, and Colombia, which greatly benefited from the opening of the Panama Canal in 1914. The canal allowed for the first time to export coffee from the country's Pacific coast, which was previously unattainable. The Green Dragon Tavern in Boston, Massachusetts, the Green Dragon, also a coffee shop, was where the 1773 tea unloading in Boston Harbor was planned. With that being said, it's time to end today's video. Press the like button and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stuff. Peace out.